Well, let's get our song books out. Let's turn to Joe Mark number 945. 945 will be our invitation song. And we'll turn to number 590. After this song, we'll have our announcement. Somebody have an announcement. Just might not have one. Right here. Wow, you can check this announcement. 590. Jesus is all the world to me, my life, my joy, my all. He is my strength from day to day. Without him I would fall. When I am sad, to him I go. No other one can cheer me so. When I am sad, he makes me glad. He's my friend. Jesus is all the world to me, my friend in trial sore. I go to him for blessings and he gives them more and more. He sends the sunshine and the rain. He sends the harvest, golden grain. Sunshine and rain, harvest of grain. He's my friend. Jesus is all the world to me. I want no better friend. I trust him now, I'll trust him when life's fleeting days shall end. Beautiful life with such a friend. Beautiful life that has no end. Eternal life, eternal joy. He's my friend.
Good evening, everybody. Glad you could make it out tonight on this rainy night. Our prayer list, well, first I'd like to ask you to silence for most of us, please. Our prayer list is Peyton Richardson, Martha Downs, Paul Curbo, Johnny Thomas, he's here tonight. Weaver Mills, he's here again tonight. And Roberta Watson. And Sandy Hartzell has cancer. That's wife of Don Hartzell, but she's a preach here many moons ago. Keith Clark has been admitted to the rehab hospital this past week in room 249B. Denise Richardson had a double knee surgery, huge. It was successful. The doctor took an hour and 15 minutes to replace both knees, and she's up and walking all right. Vince Hardage was in a wreck this past Thursday. He's doing okay this morning?
Home doing better.
Good, he's off the sore. He was in the hospital 3 days. That's what we got here. The summer youth series at North Jefferson, I think that was Monday night.
This will be Friday.
Okay. At North Jefferson, Mount Vernon, Friday. Be at the building at 6 o'clock. They're planning I think that Learn and Serve planning meeting. All right. Anybody else have anything else? About Lord, Lord, Matt. Most gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we're so blessed to be here tonight, to be blessed by a true and living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Lord. And we praise and honor you with our lives. Dear Lord, we ask that all the things we do will be pleasing to thee. Dear Lord, we are asking you to be with the ones that are mentioned here tonight on the sick list. Be with the young among our number to help them resist the devil wherever he may show his face. Lord, give them much strength and boldness and confidence to go about your work as they go about their everyday lives. Dear Lord, we pray that you'll be with this congregation and help us to be godly and more godly tomorrow than we were today. Strive in the old path, dear Lord, as our forefathers have done. We thank you, Lord, for the generations that have gone before us and the examples that they left and the ones that are still alive that are giving us true spiritual food through their lifestyle, through the things that they've done for us, dear Lord, and the things they've taught us. Dear Lord, that's an invaluable lesson that we'll never can repay. We're so grateful to you for those people I'm talking about. Dear Lord, most of all, we're thankful to you for our Savior Jesus. We ask, Lord, that we've been found good and faithful to give us home to thee in the end. In Jesus' name, amen.
Sometimes there are questions asked along the lines of, does the Old Testament apply to us today? Or are we still under the Ten Commandments? Those kinds of questions come out of a sort of a misunderstanding of what the purpose of the Old Testament was. And one of the key verses that tells us what the purpose of the Old Testament was is found in Exodus chapter 34 and verses 27 and 28. And in these two verses, we read exactly what the covenant that God gave to Moses, who that covenant was for. Now look at what these verses say. This is Exodus 34, verses 27 and 28. Then the Lord said to Moses, write these words, for according to the tenor of these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. Now, we've studied the 10 Commandments in some detail here in a series of sermons and noticed how that many of those commandments contain great moral teaching that is also reflected within the New Testament. But when the 10 Commandments were originally given, they were given to a specific people, a specific nation, the nation of Israel itself. And God is saying that very precisely here in verse 27, that I have made the covenant with you and with Israel. The Mosaic covenant was not made with any other nation other than Israel. And for that reason, when we study the Old Testament, we've got to keep in mind that primarily the context is God working with the nation of Israel for the purposes that He has in mind in redeeming mankind through the Savior who would come from that nation that we know as Jesus the Christ. And so, while there are some great moral truths that we can learn from the Old Testament, it is not primarily addressed to us as a people. It was addressed to the nation of Israel very specifically. And for that reason, while we can study these things and while we can learn some great lessons about God, and while we can really understand some moral principles that God has given, a lot of the things in the Old Covenant are very strange to us. And they're very, we don't really don't understand why God is writing these things. But if we will remember a specific nation, and that the laws that he gives to them are laws that are nationalistic in nature, the Old Testament can become a little bit more understandable to us. Because when we look at the laws of our nation, we're going to see that there are laws against theft, that there are laws against murder, that there are laws against espionage, that there are laws against a whole lot of things. A lot of which, and some of which, have nothing to do with moral principles. So, for example, the tax code. It's like that big, I think. And is there any morality in it? Well, no. We won't debate that issue, I guess, but at least tonight. But certainly, it's not about morality. It's just about the best way to, levy those taxes and then collect those taxes, and what to do if people don't pay the taxes, and all of those things. But that's part of having a nation. And a lot of the things that we read about in the Old Testament here are just that. It's part of having a nation. Now, there's other things that are important that we need to learn about. But by and large, the majority of the Mosaic Law has to do with establishing that nation of Israel as a unique political body. Now today, God has a body that belongs to Him, but it's not a physical nation like Israel was. Rather, it's the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, the church of Jesus Christ. And we can be members of that wonderful body today through accepting the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins. We do that by hearing His Word and believing, repenting of our sins, confessing Him as the Christ, and being baptized so as to be born into the family of God. And when we're part of that family, we're part of a great nation. Not a physical nation, but a spiritual nation. Jesus said to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this earth." And so, as we think about the laws that applied to that nation in that day, today we have spiritual laws, a spiritual covenant that applies to a spiritual nation. We are not a people that has a physical boundary of land. Rather, we're joined together by one fundamental principle, the blood that Jesus Christ shed on the cross. Do you want to be part of God's kingdom today, God's spiritual nation, to be a citizen of heaven? Why not respond to the Lord's invitation tonight to become a child of God while together we stand and while we sing?
Here at the cross, Christ will meet you there. He intercedes for you. Lift up your voice, leave with Him your care, and begin life anew. Kneel at the cross, leave every care. Kneel at the cross.
Lord, we thank you for this time that you've given us to come here and study your word and apply it to our lives. And take what we learned here today from what we do study and take it to the world and help us to teach somebody and have the courage to show them what the truth is, what we get through these studies. Be with the ones that are giving the studies tonight. Be with Kevin. Be with all the schoolroom teachers and classroom teachers to help them to convey their message in a clear, concise fashion. And guide us safely home at the end of this service. Forgive us of our many sins and let us meet back again on Sunday. Be your will. In Christ's name we pray. How are you?
I have no idea, Scott.
How Miss Dawn? Hey, bud. Well, your grandma coming home. She going to home.
All right, I believe Scott started on Exodus 33 last week or finished it or something. And so we're going to pick up with Exodus 34 tonight. And if you would like to have questions for Exodus 33 through 36, I have those right here. If you would like to have them, raise your hand, and I'll give them to you. If you already have them, then you're in good shape. This is 33 through 36. So we're moving into chapter 34, and in chapter 34 we see that, of course, we remember that Moses broke the original tablets, right? When he came down from Mount Sinai, and there the people were engaged in all kinds of debauchery. He threw the tablets on the ground and they broke them. So now, it's time to receive the covenant again. He's got to go back up there and get it a second time. Okay? And so, the Lord tells him to do what? And this is question number 4. Who cut the 2 tablets of stone the second time? Yeah, Moses did, right? Yeah, evidently God cut them the first time, and Moses cut them the second time. Now,
To refresh my memory, they had to be cut because Moses dropped them coming down the mountain, right?
right, he didn't drop them, he threw them down intentionally. I mean, he threw them on the ground and broke them. And that was, because of the sin of the people. Now, we don't know how big these tablets were themselves. In the movies, Moses has a couple of big rocks, like this, walking down the mountain, as if these things are just enormous. And when you see them depicted in popular artwork and things like that, they look really big, they're rounded at the top and sort of square at the bottom. But we really don't know what they look like. And some have speculated that the actual tablets themselves were probably, might not have been any bigger than the palm of a human hand. And they might have been just, rectangular in shape, not necessarily had a rounded top, But I think Cecil B. DeMille was the one who sold us that picture of the Ten Commandments. Y'all seen that movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's good show. I mean, as movies go, I like it. But probably didn't have a rounded top or anything like that. But now Moses is supposed to cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and then God says, I will write on these tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Yes.
Well, it's interesting what you read in your devotional, because it says that, and the Lord said to Moses, write these words. So, but it says that God is going to write them. But in 27, it says, it indicates that you, Moses, will write.
Well, yes. Yeah. So,
But there's another thought they said, I was reading, we were talking about.
but it says in verse 28, so he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the Ten Commandments. But it has a capital H. My Bible has a capital H on he there. He wrote, as if God was the one that wrote it. But
Verse 134, that's what it says. God is going to write. But there was some other thoughts they said that may not be the only thing. We're not giving information. It may not be the only thing God gave. Because look at all the other things, the laws they had. So there may be another book or something that he actually wrote all this down.
Yeah, look what it says though. God says, I will write on these tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you wrote. Okay. So whatever God said he would write, it was going to be what was on the first tablets. So when we turn over to 27 and 28, evidently those were not, if he told Moses to write those things, then maybe those weren't the words that were on the first tablets. Those were different words.
Because there was a lot of commands that the people of Moses gave to the Israelite people as things that they had to do.
Yes, there were a lot of them, and they wouldn't have all fit on 2 tablets. Okay? Probably on the 2 tablets were the 10 Commandments. Probably. We don't know that, but that's probably what it was. And then the rest of the stuff that God gave Moses, and Moses had to write that out himself.
And it's a good lesson, though, even though Moses was one of the best of the best. It's a good lesson in not letting your anger get a hold of you, at a moment, dropping the tablets.
Well, yeah, I suppose we could look at it like that. If he did it out of anger, then he shouldn't have done that.
And he had emotions going, evidently. I mean, his emotions were flowing when
I think he was angry. I think the text says he was angry. There's somewhat of symbolism, though, in breaking the tablets, because the people were breaking the covenant with their behavior, right? And so when he broke the tablets, he basically symbolized what the actions of the people were doing. They were breaking God's covenant. And so when he broke the tablets, that was the same type of behavior that they were involved in. So I don't know if that was a sin or not to break the tablets. It was certainly, it was done out of anger, I think. I think Moses was angry, but he might have been rightfully angry at that particular situation. And but whatever the case was, we know that God told him to cut his own tablets a second time. You're going to break my stuff, and you're going to make it yourself the next time, right? Anyway, kind of sounds like something I tell my kids. All right, so question number 5: Why did God not want the children of Israel to make a covenant with the people of the land. Okay, so we get back into God speaking to Moses here on Mount Sinai, and he starts telling him some of the things that he wants him to observe. And in verse 12 he says, "Take heed to yourself, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land where you are going, lest it be a snare in your midst." And what is that snare that he would have Moses to be careful about in making a covenant with the inhabitants of the land? He goes on to explain it here in verses 13, 14, and 15. So if you need time to read those verses, go ahead and look them over real quick.
In 14, the key answer would be, "For thou shalt worship no other gods, for the Lord, whose name is a jealous God."
Okay?
He don't want you, that was,
I thought that was the answer to number 5. Because you're not supposed to, thou shalt worship no other God before the Lord.
and that came out of a different version of the Bible than I've got tonight.
Yeah. So, and what's the context of that? Why is God telling them that?
Because he's a jealous God.
Say that again, Brother Weaver. He didn't want them to be influenced by paganism or idolatry, right? So, and that's why he's saying the things that he's saying here, that when they go into the land, they're going to find a lot of idolatry, a lot of paganism. And they're supposed to destroy all of their altars, verse 13 says, and their sacred pillars and their images and all of those things. And he doesn't want them to make a covenant with them, verse 15 says, lest they play the harlot with their gods and make sacrifice to their gods and basically be corrupted by idolatry and all of the stuff that goes along with idolatry. Now, idolatry is a word that had a lot of things associated with it. It was the worship of images, the carved images, but in association with that worship was all kinds of evil, immoral, and sinful practices that went along with it. So sometimes the sacrifice of child sacrifice was involved in the idolatry. Sometimes fornication of various different kinds was involved in the idolatry. So there were all kinds of immoral things that took place in these pagan rituals. And because of that, God wanted them to eliminate it completely and eliminate the idolatry as well, because they weren't supposed to worship any God except God. He's a jealous God, and jealousy means that you are basically protective of that which belongs to you, right? So I can say that I'm jealous of my wife. I don't want any other man coming around her, fooling around with her or anything like that. I'm jealous of my wife, and that's right, to be jealous in that way. And God's a jealous God, and that's why he says that he's a jealous God, verse 14. Because he does not share worship with created things. He alone expects to receive worship, and no other thing is to be worshipped except God himself. Okay? And he's jealous of that, and rightly so, because it's his. It belongs to him, and it doesn't belong to any other. All right? Okay. Question number 6. How long was Moses on the mountain, and what was different about him afterward? And we looked at that, we skimmed over that in verses 27 28 there. So, what is it? How long was he on the mountain?
40 days, 40 nights.
40 days and 40 nights without bread or water. How about that, huh? What do you think about that?
That there be some divine intervention here.
So there was some divine intervention there?
Well, it was the second time you did it too.
Yeah, oh, was it? Okay, yeah. 40 days and 40 nights. What's significant about that? Does that remind you of anything else?
Well,
Connected with the ark, I think, 40 days, right?
Okay, so the ark was, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights when God flooded the earth. That's a good point.
When the devil tempted him, Karen said, wasn't it 40 days and 40 nights to Jesus? Was it that long?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, and that's Mark chapter 1 and verse 13, that he was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, and he didn't eat anything either when he fasted for that long. Jesus did. What does that symbolize? What do those days symbolize? You got the 40 days and 40 nights of rain from the ark. You got Moses being on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And then Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights.
Purification.
Yes, that's right. Purification. And that's what's happening with the nation of Israel as well. There's a purification process going on here. And remember, this is about their holiness, because God is a holy God, right? And He cannot be with a people that is unholy. And He's going to consume them. He'll destroy them if they are unholy, and if they don't act the way that they're supposed to act. You know, when we go back to chapter 33, when God told them, I'm not going with you. You go ahead and go to the land of Canaan and you take it and I'll give it to you, but I'm not going with you. And that was upsetting to the people because they wanted God to be with them and they wanted God to take care of them. And so God said, you know what, if I have to put up with this, I'm going to consume them. I'm going to destroy them because of the sin that they keep on committing. And so there was a purification process was needed. Remember, when they got to Mount Sinai and they were down at the bottom, God told them, He said, don't come near the mountain. Don't let any of your livestock come near the mountain. Don't let any of the people come near the mountain. Stay away from it because I will destroy you if you come near the mountain. Okay? Now, again, that's not about the idea that, God's just this kind of vindictive kind of guy who likes, gets jollies or something from smiting people. Like he's got a smite button and every once in a while he goes and then laughs about it when somebody dies. That's not who God is, okay? What is He trying to do? He's trying to protect the people from His holiness. Okay, that's really what He's trying to do. He's warning them. He's giving them correction, instruction on how to live so that they can actually be with Him. And all of this is preparatory for His dwelling in the tabernacle. Okay, and then last week in chapter 33, it says that it talked about the tent, that Moses had outside the camp. That's verse 7 of chapter 33. Now that wasn't the tabernacle, okay? The tabernacle hadn't been built before this point. The tabernacle doesn't get built until the end of the book of Exodus, chapter 40. And then finally God comes into the tabernacle. This little tent is a tent that Moses had pitched outside of the camp, okay? And it says that Moses took his tent and pitched it outside the camp, far from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of meeting. And it came to pass that everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting, which was outside the camp. And that's where God met with Moses, was outside the camp, okay? And that's where this little tent was pitched. Now this tent isn't the same tent as the tabernacle that God's telling them to build, that the priests are going to go into and offer worship and all that. That's not the same one, all right? This is a special tent. But God is dwelling in this little tent out there outside of the nations. So the nations got their spot and they're dwelling inside their tents, and then far away from them is this little tent. And God's dwelling in that. He's not in the midst of them. Okay? Now I know a lot of times we get the picture of God being in the middle, and then Israel's all around, everywhere around him, right? And that's the picture after the tabernacle was built. But that's not the picture before the tabernacle was built, okay? The picture before the tabernacle was built is here's the nation of Israel over here, and all the people are dwelling together, and then God's way over here outside, away from them. He's not with them. He's separated from them. And there's a reason for that. It's showing us that God can't dwell among His people unless He sanctifies them, unless He purifies them. And that's what He's doing in this process. Okay? All right. So, how long was Moses on the mountain? We just answered that. And what was different about him afterward? And that's verses 29 to 35 of chapter 34. His face was real bright and shiny. And why was that?
Because he's present with God up on the mountain and everything.
Yes, because he was given a special view of God that nobody else was really given. And that's what the end of chapter 33 is about. And that's what Moses asks for in verse 18 of chapter 33. He said, "Please show me your glory." Okay? That's what Moses asked for. To see the glory of God. And God didn't even show him that. Because Moses was a physical being, and God would have just burned him up because of his full glory. Okay? So, but what does God say? I'll tell you what I will do. And look at this, verse 19 of chapter 33. He says, "I will make all my goodness pass before you." All my goodness. Okay? I think that's an interesting expression, because what God is saying is that He's fundamentally good, right? But He's also ultimate reality. Now we don't really associate those two things together, goodness and reality. We kind of separate them out within our mind. We think of the way that our society thinks and the way that we think on a daily basis. We have a very materialistic perspective, I guess, and we'll look at this piece of paper and we'll say, well, it's neither moral nor immoral, right? It's amoral. It doesn't have morality associated with it. But God is not like that. He's a being whose existence is good. Not just because of the consequences, but because of who He is. Because of His existence itself. That's a difficult concept to grasp. Because a lot of times we think of good, we associate good with consequences, right? But God is telling us something very different about Himself here. He's saying that He's goodness personified. Okay? So if you could think of that which is good, which is a hard thing to think of, by the way, God is basically saying that's who I am. I am that which is good. I am a being, the substance of the essence of whom is goodness. That's not like us, If you look at me and my being, you would say, well, your essence is what? Well, what you see before me, you say, well, It's water, 80% water, right? And carbon, and all these different elements. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking that same thing. I think to me it appears that when God wanted Moses to pull the tent out and worship out and meet him outside of that, God cannot be in the presence of evil or the way the children of Israel had acted. So he's making a point also that I can't be with you. I can be out here, but I cannot be God. You can't lie. You can't be in the presence of evil. So all of that goodness, like you said, that's all it gets. You can't be anything other than that.
Right.
And that's the guarantee, the hope that we have is because he is that way. Because if he wasn't, what would we be like?
Oh, yes, yes.
So he has to be that way.
That's right, and that's a good thing that he is. But he says to Moses in verse 20, "You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live." Now, it's not because God is just being mean that he says that. It's because God is like the sun, okay? If you fly into the sun, you're going to die, right? No man can fly into the sun and live. Is it because the sun is such a mean and nasty person that that's the case? No, you wouldn't say that. You wouldn't say, well, that wicked old sun up there, it won't let me fly into it, It's so mean. You wouldn't say that. It wouldn't make any sense because of the nature of what the sun is. Well, God's saying the same kind of thing about himself. He's saying that because of the nature of who I am as a being, you can't see my face and live. And that's what he's talking about here. And so the complete glory, that is. And so the Lord says, "Here is place by me, you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be while my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." Now, does God have a back and a face and hands and all of that? What do you think?
We don't know.
Why do you say we don't know?
Because it's not here in the Bible what it looks like. We've never had a physical description of him.
Well, it says right here, he has hands and face and a back. What do you think?
I still think we don't know.
I'm being a little pushy with you. But any ideas along that line? You don't know. Well, this is sometimes called an anthropomorphism, all right, which is assigning human attributes to God so that we can understand a little bit what God's like. Okay, and God, now remember, in the New Testament, John chapter 4, verse 24, Jesus says God is a spirit. Okay, God is a spirit. Right? He's not flesh and bones like you and I are. And he doesn't have physical hands and a physical face and a physical back like you and I have. Okay? So he's a spirit. And as the ultimate real thing in existence, he's spiritual in his nature. Now that doesn't mean he's not real. And it doesn't mean that he's not, solid. Okay? And he's real. He's the most real thing that there is in existence. But nevertheless, I think God is using some figures here to explain himself to Moses, so that Moses will kind of get an understanding of what's really going on. In other words, what God is saying is that, look, Moses, I'm going to protect you from my ultimate glory so that you won't burn up when I come by. And I'm going to show you a little bit of it, but I'm not going to show you the whole thing, because if I did, you'd be toast. All right? So that's what the image here is, and that's what that's supposed to communicate to us. But anyway, the point is that Moses was different when he came down off the mountain, he had this shining countenance. It was because God did show him part of his glory. He didn't show him his full glory, but he showed him part of that. And even part of that changed Moses. It made him appear different. And that was visibly present to those who saw Moses come down from the mountain. He had a visible difference to his appearance. All right. So let's move on to chapter 35. What was to happen to those who worked on the Sabbath? So in chapter 35, we have again the message that God wanted Moses to give to the people. And
To be put to death.
yes, right. So the Sabbath was to be respected, and if they didn't respect that, they were going to be put to death. Verse 2, work shall be done for 6 days, but the seventh day shall be a holy day for you, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your dwellings on the Sabbath day. And you remember, there's another reference to the Sabbath a few chapters back, and we looked at that specifically, and it said that God gave them the Sabbath so that they would know that it was Him who was sanctifying them. Okay? Because what were they not supposed to do on the Sabbath? Work. Yeah, they weren't supposed to work. And so what did that mean? That just means they didn't do anything. They sat around and did nothing. And God's point was, I sanctify you. And we have to remember that all of these things that God is doing in the Old Testament, all these things that He's telling them to do, they come from Him, okay? So He gets the credit for all this. And He's the one who's sanctifying them when they do the things that God commands them to do. And they do those by faith because they believe in Him and they trust Him that He's going to take care of it. And if they will do these things by faith, then God is saying, I will be with you, I will dwell with you, I will sanctify you, I will make you holy, and you will be a people of my special possession. All right. So they were not earning their salvation, even under the Old Covenant. They didn't earn their salvation. Okay, it wasn't supposed to be that way. It was an act. These were acts of faith that they were doing so that God could sanctify them. And the Sabbath day was supposed to remind them that it wasn't through their doing and their work that they were being saved. Okay. All right. So. Now, what kind of offering did the people bring?
Gold, silver, and bronze.
Say it again.
Gold, silver, and bronze.
Gold, silver, bronze, and what else?
Blue, purple, and scarlet.
Yeah, all kinds of different threads and linens, and verse 6, 7, 8, 9. Right. So all these materials, they were supposed to bring all of these things as an offering. Now, what was Bezalel and Aholiab, what were they expected to do in making the tabernacle? Chapter 36.
They were the two that instructed all the other people, no one knew that part, did you? Part of that. Speak of, that God gave them, selected them Himself, put all the experience and knowledge and things they needed to cut right, to whatever He wanted to build through anything, they were able to do it.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's right. These were the master carpenters or the master builders or whatever you want to call them. And they were the ones who were responsible for actually constructing this tabernacle. They had to make all of the coverings that were to go in the tabernacle and all of the poles and all of the furniture that would go inside of it. You know, everything that was in the tabernacle, they made it with their own hands. They made it from scratch. You know, they didn't go down to the tabernacle manufacturing plant and buy a prefab tabernacle, you know, where they could just set it up, you know, in a couple of days. They had to make all of this stuff by hand from scratch. All right? And so these guys were the ones who knew how to do that work. And then they guided everybody else. Yes, sir? That's right. They had to make it according to the pattern that was shown to Moses on the mountain. And what does the end of verse 1 say that they did? This is chapter 36, verse 1.
That's one of your questions, isn't it?
Yes, it's question number 9. What was Bezalel and Aholiab expected to do in making the tabernacle?
All manner of work.
All manner of work. What else does it say?
All that he commanded them to do.
Yes, that's it right there. They shall do according to all that the Lord has commanded. Right? That's what they were supposed to do. According to all that the Lord has commanded. Now look, this expression is important, and it becomes very important in chapter 39. Okay, and you see it over and over and over again. To do according to all that the Lord commanded. All right, so this is the first in reference to Bezalel and Aholiab. This is the first time we see that, and but then we see that they did. So here's the expectation to do according to all that the Lord commanded. And we get to chapter 39, and it says, they did this according to all that the Lord commanded, and they did that according to all that the Lord commanded. And this expression recurs over and over again. So look for that when you read through chapter 39 with this next set of questions here that I'm going to hand out in just a few minutes. All right, now, question number 10. What was significant about the offering that the people brought? And this is verses 2 through 7. So there was an offering commanded in chapter 35 in verses 4 through 9. Moses spoke to all the congregation of Israel, children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing which the Lord commanded, saying, take from among you an offering to the Lord." And then he lists the things to be offered, right? And that's 35 verses 4 through 9. Now we're in chapter 36 and verses 2 through 7, and we see the actual implementation of that. We see the execution of that. And what does it say? What is significant about their giving here? Yes, that's right. They brought more than what was needed. And notice what it says. Let's just read this, verses 2 through 7. Then Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab, and every gifted artisan in whose heart the Lord had put wisdom, everyone whose heart was stirred to come and do the work. And they received from Moses all the offering which the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of making the sanctuary. So they continued bringing to him free will offerings every morning. Then all the craftsmen who were doing all the work of the sanctuary came, each from the work he was doing. And they spoke to Moses, saying, "The people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded us to do." So Moses gave a commandment, and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, saying, "Let neither man nor woman do any more work for the offering of the sanctuary." And the people were restrained from bringing. For the material they had was sufficient for all the work to be done, indeed too much. What a great example, right? Of giving as we ought to give. That'd be a great problem to have, to be able to say, well, we need y'all to stop giving for a while because we got too much. I don't think we have any worries about that today, but such a circumstance is truly a blessing for them. And it would be a blessing for us today as well. All right? Any other questions about that or comments that you'd like to make about that or about anything that we've looked at? Any of the questions that we have on the paper? Any of the answers that we've given tonight need to be gone over again? Or refreshed or anyone? All right, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to hand out next week's questions then, okay? And y'all read chapters 37 through 40 for next week, and we'll be done with the book of Exodus next week, okay? And then the week after that, we'll start into the book of Leviticus, all right? I trust you, Moses. You have to put these in a box. That's pretty good. That's a good point. I like that. No, that's good. Well, his life's been more slow this week. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
He's feeling pretty good, so
All right.
we'll get the PET scan tomorrow.
Okay.